So if you've been watching the story so far, you've seen a lot of vehicles being exhibited during the Crew Motorfest, yet it is no exaggeration to say that this game has many, many more that you would not see in the playlist. Some of these cars are from the Crew 2, some of these cars even go all the way back to the Crew 1. Today's episode is going to be a follow-up to the vehicle showcase we did in episode 5. And let's be honest, if I owned all these vehicles IRL, I'd literally be a gazillionaire. Now let's roll the intro. Y'all definitely saw this one coming, but we're starting off today with a handful of Corvettes. Yes, I know that I complain a lot about Mustangs being the poster child of many racing games, including the Crew, but to be fair, they did bundle in a lot of Corvettes also. The 2009 6th generation ZR1 was my most used vehicle in the Crew 1, with nearly 5,000 miles on the odometer, not to mention it's also my most used Corvette in games like Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2010 and 2020. This really is the last truly analog-feeling Corvette. From Gen 7 onward, everything starts to go digital, and that could be good or bad depending on how you feel about it. The styling for this car is a lot more rounded and curvy, and I guess a lot of it is holdovers from Gen 5, the only thing missing being Gen 5's pop-up headlights. Now, with Gen 7, you have the Stingray, which again, you've seen me use during my road trip talks of the Crew 1 as well as NFS Rivals. And as I said, General Motors began to go more digital, and the aesthetic changed from round to more square. This was just the car fashion of the 2010s, I suppose. I still think it looks good, but I'm still nostalgic for the older stuff because Generation 5 was what I grew up with, you know, the original Hot Pursuit on the PlayStation 1. Now, when we get to the 7th gen ZR1, this car has one of the most peculiar stylings for a Corvette, in my personal opinion. And getting a convertible of it just feels like you're driving a Porsche 918 Spyder or a McLaren P1. Like, this car does punch well above its weight class in terms of buying a $150,000 hypercar, seeing how the 918 and the P1 both cost nearly 8 times as much individually. But at the same time, if I was a multimillionaire IRL, I would buy one of those two cars over the ZR1 because it just feels kind of uncanny valley for a Corvette. When you get down to it, Corvettes were meant to be a blue-collar American sports car. It's something you'd feel at home using as a daily driver, which the C6 ZR1 still was, but the C7 ZR1 just isn't. Anyway, enough of the Corvettes, but we're not done with General Motors just yet. I'm going to be honest here. Prior to my story playthrough of the Crew 1, I was never a fan of the Corvette's red-headed step-cousin, which you might know as the Camaro. For starters, you can usually buy 2 Camaros for the price of a single Corvette, and they were always a bit of a rough-around-the-edges kind of car. Worse performance, a bit of a wonkier aesthetic, and yes, most people would just buy a Mustang instead. But then it's like, the more I used it, the more I could see that its hardiness is in fact this car's strength. My SS model leans into this by being purely a drift car, so not nearly as fast as a Corvette by any stretch, but this thing will mash into the corners and look cool as frick doing so. And then you have the ZL1, which I found myself loving even more for one simple reason. When they refreshed the Camaro in the 2010s, they made it similar to the Silverado trucks that were coming out during that same range of years. Again, as the Corvette's transition into the digital age became more exotic, the newer Camaros retained that down-to-earth aesthetic people expect from General Motors brands. It's just a shame that this one has a broken speedometer. 100 miles per hour is actually 160 kilometers an hour, not 190. Moving on. I promise there are no other GM vehicles in today's episode. Time to move on to Mopar, FCA, Stellantis, whatever you want to call them. This is the Jeep Wrangler. And it's a bit of an older one, again, being featured as far back as the Crew 1. Okay, bias is here because I drive a Compass IRL and the aesthetic is similar, though the Patriot would be the more proper comparison instead. The thing about Jeep vehicles which often comes up is that the Patriot, the Wrangler, the Gladiator, and even the Renegade were the more masculine-styled cars, while the Compass, the Cherokee, and even the Grand Cherokee, to an extent, were the more feminine-styled cars. But if you ask me, stuff like that is dumb, and I painted my Wrangler purple just to piss everyone off. Sorry, not sorry. Every Jeep vehicle is pretty similar in spec as far as off-road capability is concerned. They all have trail-rated equivalents, the quote-unquote freedom drive systems, and their engines are just powerful enough for their respective purposes. The only real exception, in my opinion, was the Grand Cherokee Trackhawk, which they threw a damn Hellcat engine in, but we covered that car in a previous showcase, so whatever. But if we want to talk about off-road performance, there's always the Mercedes X-Class midsize truck. I love this thing, and I wish it had been brought to North America, but it never was. This is like luxury truck status while still retaining that analog feel you want in something you're going to throw around on the trails from day to day. But that does come at a cost, seeing as the real-world X-Class is priced nearly twice as expensive as a Chevrolet Colorado ZR2. Oh, Ubisoft, you should put the Colorado in the game already. Okay, what's next? Oh look, it's another Bentley. This is a bit of an older one, the Continental GT. Like the Mulliner Bacalar, it does the two V6 engines literally welded together thing, something I just cannot get over. Oh, and this is an E85 ethanol vehicle if you care about that sort of thing. Would I prefer this over the Bacalar? Well, this is $250,000. The Bacalar was $1.3 million. I could buy 5 of these for the cost of one Bacalar. But I mean, it's still nice, still premium looking. So yes, it's good. Moving on. Do I say that too much? Whatever. The McLaren 12C. We've seen it a lot in Need for Speed, a little bit here and there in the Crew 2, and to be fair, it's known as baby's first hypercar. When it came out, it was also a $250,000 car, so like the newer Corvette ZR1, this thing is also punching somewhat above its weight class much of the time. This may be a bit of an odd statement, but I feel there isn't much to really set the 12C apart from other cars. It looks very similar to a Porsche 911 Carrera 4S, albeit with headlights from a 6th generation Corvette. But for some reason, I just like it. I like it more than McLaren F1 or P1, so yeah, it gets used a lot for me when I'm just free driving. Next vehicle, please. So in the prior showcase, we talked about the Audi TT as being the Audi for 5-figure incomes. And that was no small exaggeration because this car, the Audi R8, is what you buy when you have serious money. I still remember when Jeremy Clarkson of Top Gear fame did a review of this car, and he placed it side by side with the Corvette ZR1. Funny how that happens. In any case, his review was that this car is insanely expensive for what it is. He went on and on about how Audi pretty much upsells you on everything from carbon fiber rear panels, to color-coordinated seatbelts, to charging you for picking your car up from the factory yourself. I mean, this is Audi we're talking about. But all those things being what they are, I don't know if a rich person would really care because for the money, you're still getting a 200-mile-per-hour supercar with an engine out of a Lamborghini. And trust me, no matter how expensive an Audi R8 is, you can expect a true Lambo to cost over twice as much. So let's talk about one of those things. The Lamborghini Aventador. I did actually drive this for a road trip talk in the Crew 1, and then promptly proceeded never to use it again in the Crew 2, because I literally could not afford it in the Crew 2. I wish I was making that up. And then I needed it for a summit in Motorfest, and finally said screw it, and grinded for it in both games. I think. I hope. This is when you start getting into the true exotic, freakish types of cars that you'd never see just cruising out on the highway. This was originally a $500,000 car, but it still feels stylistically approachable, more so than, say, a Ferrari or hell, something like a Pagani. Geez, those cars are wild. And it's at this point we need to talk about another Lamborghini, one you might recognize from a previous episode. Yes, I actually shelled out the exorbitant amount of money for the Motorfest exclusive Lamborghini Technomar Land Yacht, or Technomar Lamborghini Land Yacht. I don't understand the name nomenclature. Was it worth it? Honestly, I still don't know. I do want to do more boating videos in the future as an alternative type of road trip talk, but am I going to do enough to justify that expense? Only time will tell. While we're at it, let's talk planes. because they don't get enough love in this game. A lot of what's available is either old or is stylized to look older. The thing about the Harmon Rocket III is it looks 21st century without being exotic, and it is, at least in my opinion, the best handling plane in the Motorfest roster, but maybe there is better and I just haven't delved too deep into them. I don't know. Oahu is also small compared to the mainland US, so do you really actually need a plane at all? That's a question for a different episode. Getting back into cars, and rather expensive ones for that matter, I feel like I absolutely must bring up the Bugatti Voiture Noir, because even though it is featured in one of the Motorfest playlists, I'm not entirely sure yet if I will be airing that playlist, and this car is way too insane to omit. See, the real-world Voiture Noir is a one-off, nearly $20 million in value. And actually, nobody really knows who owns the real-world Voiture Noir. But thankfully, the crew as a series lets anybody buy it. So in the first live summit I ever competed in, back in the summer of 2022, I grinded in order to get it. Ironically, I had just returned home from a mother-daughter trip to Las Vegas, and that live summit was taking place primarily in Las Vegas. So I felt like I had to, and it was also one of the few summits I ever took platinum in. So that's nice. Do I drive this car normally in free roam? Honestly, not really. It's really not my style, and maybe that's because I'm a rather simple person at heart. I mentioned in my end of 2023 video how I'd never want any of these more expensive cars IRL. So to the crew, I do say thank you for the privilege, but that's all really. And I wanted to leave the episode here, but then I remembered I had this. This is the Proto Lucky one. And to be completely honest, I had no idea where it came from or how I got it. Supposedly, it was a Motor Pass award in the Crew 2, and it bears mentioning this car does not exist in real life. Proto is a fictional manufacturer, and the vehicles created by them and the crew are all rather extreme, from Formula 1 cars to powerboats to hovercrafts and even a helicopter. And as such, I couldn't even begin to imagine how much a car like this would cost in real life. It is very possible this car would cost even more than the Bugatti Voiture Noir does, and I wouldn't really be surprised by that given this thing looks like a casino on wheels. I literally get Fallout New Vegas vibes just from driving it. But I think this is where I'm actually gonna leave off. Let me know which of these cars you liked and would drive. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next episode.